Welcome to Here Where You Belong, your go-to podcast for exploring belonging with your host and belonging expert, Dia Irby. We are thrilled to have you join us. Together, we'll dive into the depths of what it means for each of us to find our own place in the world, whether it's within our communities, our relationships, or within ourselves. Today's episode is meant to inspire, uplift, and remind you that no matter where you are or where you're headed, you have a place where you truly belong. So grab a cozy spot and settle in. Welcome to Here Where You Belong.
Hello, awesome belongers. Welcome home to Here Where You Belong podcast. Today's guest believes virtue built a nation and it can rebuild our hearts. I'm Dia, your host. Get ready to be inspired and blessed. Help me welcome our guest today, Richard Rains. Hey, Richard.
Hi, Dia. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you were able to join me. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Richard Rains is a husband to Jessica, a dad to 5 grown children. That's a survival story. A Christian, an assistant vice president for mission advancement and recruitment, and a theology teacher at Elam Bible College. He's also the author of Finding Washington: Why Americans Need to Rediscover the Virtues of Her Most Essential Founding Father. A fascinating and often humorous look at George Washington's faith and character and what they can teach us today. With 2 master's degrees in theology and church history and a PhD soon to follow, Richard brings both wisdom and wit to conversations about faith, virtue, and the next generation. His passion is helping young adults and all of us reclaim a sense of purpose, integrity, and belonging rooted in timeless truth. Boy, we need that. Richard, any additions, subtractions, or corrections?
No, that's a lot. My wife and I, we live in the free state of Florida, so we're experiencing the lighter version of summer. We have just one long summer with a couple of weeks of 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 cool weather that makes you think we have a fall, but we don't. The mosquitoes just nap for a couple of weeks, but no, I think that was a pretty good introduction. Thank you for that.
Okay. Well, good. Now, as you know, this podcast is about belonging, and I invite guests on the show to share their stories of belonging. It could be your own personal story of belonging or how you create belonging for others. So I'm going to just turn the mic over to you, Richard. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what an interesting topic. And I have to be really honest with you. I don't know that I've put any thought into what it means to belong or have a sense of belonging. That just it's sort of off of the radar for the way that I process information. But coming onto your podcast, having to think it through, forcing myself to think it through. I grew up in a pretty less than enviable environment. My mother was an alcoholic. She actually died when she drank herself to death when she was 45. My father, I tell people all the time, my father wasn't as interested in being married as he was getting married. My dad got married 4 times, and it finally stuck the 4th time. He married a Christian lady that loved him very dearly until he passed away several years ago. But having that fractured, upbringing, um, it was easy to get lost in what everyone else had as their priorities. But I became a Christian when I was a teenager. And I tell people this a lot, and I don't know what percentage of your listening audience is either a Christian or familiar with Christianity. But but many times we will say that in Christianity that God saves our soul. Well, in my case, with a family full of alcoholics, with there were times when we had no electricity. We would have to borrow food from neighbors to be able to eat, because anyone that's ever lived with anyone with addiction, everyone knows that the addiction comes first. And so there's very little question of the trajectory of my life. The apple never falls far from the tree, right? That's just, some people beat it, right? Some people can overcome it. I don't know that I was that kid who is headed towards overcoming my past or overcoming, what what I had seen modeled in front of me and really had no sense of belonging at all. If I had any sense of belonging, it was I just assumed I belonged to that culture. But I became a Christian when I was a teenager. And in every way, becoming a Christian, Jesus didn't just save my soul, but Jesus saved my life. And so from that moment, really until now, um, when we talk about a sense of belonging, I have a new family and new friends, and I had a new trajectory for my life. And it all revolved around this little small country church where the pastor was the most educated and he probably quit high school, but they all loved each other and they loved me. And they gave me a place where I could have a family that wasn't fractured and that wasn't sort of based on all of those crazy things that you go through when you have a family with addicts in it. And so now I have 5 children and they have no sense of that life. When I tell stories of my childhood and they hear these stories, they have no understanding. They have no practical understanding. And so belonging,
Praise God.
yeah,
They
for
don't.
me, was the end of that generational curse. And my sense of belonging now is embodied in in what in what Jesus did for me that I could not do for myself, and placing me in a family that he sanctions. And it's been a wonderful, since I was 16 to now. It has been a wonderful ride versus the first 16 years.
Wow. How often now, I'm assuming that you didn't live and stay at that little country church for your whole life, right?
That's right.
You moved around.
I
How,
did. So when I graduated from high school, I was driving away from my little high school in the truck my granddad bought me for $250. It looked like it had been rolled down a hill. And I was proud of it, though. I would wax that thing and I'd get cuts on me from the dents and the rust. But driving away from that high school, I said out loud to myself in my little truck, I will never sit in a classroom again. And I went to work as an electrician, did that for a couple of years and thought, well, I think I need to go to college. And so I went to Tennessee from South Georgia. I went to Tennessee. I crammed a 4 year degree into 8 years, and then moved back to South Georgia and started working in the church and went to graduate school later in life and now a PhD. But you're right, I didn't stay. I live in Northeast Florida, and I go to a mega church. We have about 30,000 people that attend our church in its various locations on Sunday morning, plus all those people that listen online. So it's a lot different than the little small church that I became a Christian in, for sure.
well, and here's the challenge. So what saved you was the family, that atmosphere of belonging that gave you somewhere to belong to a steady, secure family. And in all your travels, as you have been a part of other churches, and even it doesn't matter how many people are in a church, it could be the same size as your little country church and not have that sense of belonging. How many of those churches that you belonged to or visited or attended were able to create that same belonging atmosphere that attracted you in your little country church?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Part of my answer to that is I have not been a part of a lot of churches. The church of my youth, and then the church during college, and then two churches in Georgia, and now the church I attend in Florida. But but all of those churches, and the secret to any church, if it's not a small church, the secret to success of that church, at least in helping people belong, is to make the church small. And so I've been very fortunate to be under the leadership of pastors that understood that no matter how big the church is, you have to keep certain aspects of it small through Bible studies, and we call them disciple groups or small groups or whatever you want to call them, Sunday school or whatever, men's groups or whatever, just finding that niche of people. And so I've been very fortunate, Dia, that I don't have a bad experience. I don't have a bad story about that, and I think that's why I've had such a great experience with Christianity, is I've been under the leadership of people that understood what it meant to live out the Christian life in community and creating those places where you can belong.
Well, according to research, 35% of people that attend churches don't feel connected to anyone. They feel lonely sitting on the pew. that's 1 out of every 3 people sitting next to you on the pew, maybe the people on either side of you, if it's not your family. and I have a real passion to help churches remember that we are the body of Christ and we're supposed to function as a body. And when one part hurts, the other part feels it, or that body life. And you are blessed, very blessed, to have had those experiences. I'm really happy for you. And you said 5 children. They're adults out living in the world.
They are, for the most part. The ages range from 26 to 19. Our So all of them are out of the house except for our 21-year-old son. He was in the Navy and got out, and he's in college and he lived in the dorm, but we asked him to move back in with us for a little while so he could get caught up and get on his feet financially a little bit from getting out of the Navy. But he owns one half of our house, and my wife and I own the other half, and the dog just goes between the two camps based on who has food at the time. And so, but he was out of the house. And he didn't move back, because he had to. He moved back because we just all looked at kind of where he was in life and said, hey,
Numbers.
why don't you come? And honestly, I'm so into college sports and none of the other kids are, but he is. And so I'm just going to keep the boy here as long as I can because I've got someone to talk about college sports with and politics with all the time at the ready. So
Yeah.
it's worked out for he and I both, for sure.
Well, thank him for his service in the military. And once you've been out on your own, like being in the Navy, which isn't really on your own because everybody tells you what to do every second of the day, but to come back to a college atmosphere and live in a dorm where a lot of people have, for the first time, been out of the house, it's a different, it's a different.
Is, and I went to college late, like him, and so I get that because he's not a boy anymore.
Right.
He's thinking about other things, but as it pertains to this sense of belonging, it's been a challenge for him, and we've talked about it. Is that he's in an in-between space where he's not a 19, 18, 19-year-old. He's grown and he's been in the Navy and he's experienced things that men experience, and so it's really been sort of tough for him um, to wrap his arms around that sense of belonging. But we have some things at our church that he's embraced, and he's working through that. But it's a constant struggle because there's the truth of it, Dia, is that the enemy of our faith and the God of this world um, does not do anything that helps us make decisions that benefit our spiritual growth and discipleship. The entire world is designed to keep us away from God and not drive us to God. And so, for somebody like him that's sort of in between, it's been a bit of a struggle. But God's good, and so we're on that journey with Him.
Well, 75% of young people that grow up in the church leave the church in their 20s.
Yeah.
The church needs to be relevant and provide a sense of belonging. And I'm glad that it sounds like he's in a good church and in a good situation. So you went from I'm never going to be in a classroom again, well foreshadowed and planted there, to being a college teacher. And in the so that was what changed. You saw. Well, I'll just let you answer that.
Yeah, it's as simple as God's call.
Well,
God called me, and I answered, and I didn't have the whole picture. And in the world that I lived in, if there was any call at all, it was a call to preach. That's what people were called to, right? That there
if
was
you were
really no other
committed,
job in the
if you were a real Christian, that's what you would do.
and there was no other job in the church, right? And so I tell people all the time that when I was 18 years old, when I was 19 years old, God called me to preach. And then God heard me preach, and he thought, "Hey, have you considered maybe sales or some other profession?" And so really for me, that time I spent at college was a time for me to grow up, to learn Christianity in a slower pace. Um, kind of
Where'd you
get.
go to school?
I
Where'd
went
you?
to Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee.
Oh, I have friends that have gone there. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great school, still a great school. They have a
Totally.
new president, someone that I went to Lee with. He's the president of the school now.
Oh,
So, but but it was all about call. And so as I discovered the gifts that God had given me, and I did preach. I've spent most of my ministry preaching. But when we moved to Florida in 2017 and started going to a mega church, it's a lot different than going to a smaller church, and there's not as many opportunities to do things that you can do in a smaller church. And I always wanted to teach, and we started going about the time I got my second master's degree. And so I just started teaching, and I'd been teaching in the church for years, but I'd never taught college. And so since 2018, I've been teaching college, and it's become clear in that time that that is the chief expression of God's call in my life. And God has called me to train the next generation. That is my role in the church, is to train the next generation for Christian service, whether it's Christian ministry or people out there working as plumbers and electricians or bankers and in finance or real estate or whatever they do, to be working for the advancement of God's kingdom. And that's my role in the church, is to prepare those folks. So
Well,
that's a
that's awesome. That's honorable. I mean, we need that because everybody can't preach, but everybody who is a Christian, you're either a missionary or you need one.
that is a great way to put it. That's exactly right. You're either an evangelist or you need to be evangelized. I like that. I just stole that from you. I hope you know that. If you ever hear me
Okay.
say that, it's mine, right? I'll give you credit once, but then after that, it's mine.
Okay. Okay. Well, there's nothing new under the sun. I think I heard
Right.
it somewhere along the line. But yes, so I mean, this idea that the dichotomy, the Sunday Monday dichotomy, is what misrepresents what the Christian life is all about. Anyway, I wanted to talk about your book about George Washington, but we need to take a break, and this is all fascinating. We'll talk about it maybe on the second half of our episode, but we're going to be right back with Richard Rains, my awesome guest today. Be back. Hey there! Isn't my guest amazing? So glad you joined us today. In this world that often feels disconnected, building community and fostering belonging are essential. That's why I created this podcast, to bring inspiring people to you, to encourage you to create that sense of belonging and community, no matter where you are. If you're being blessed by my guest, and we have some more, like, subscribe, and share this podcast. You know who needs to hear this. Stay connected, stay true to yourself, and always remember, you belong. Now, back to our amazing guest. And we are back with my fabulous guest today, Richard Rains. And on my podcast, I have my 3 favorite questions. The first question is, what do you consider is your greatest accomplishment?
Yeah, I would say besides getting my wife to lower her standards, um, look, I don't have a lot to offer, but I made my wife laugh, and she just laughed and laughed and laughed until she looked up and we were married, and now she can't do anything about it. So that's probably it. But I would say also, I shared my background a little bit. So for me to become a college professor is way outside of the bubble of what I thought was that I was going to do in my life, and it has nothing to do with me. This is the direction God has been pointing me in my entire life, and so
Well,
I
especially
love
after you drove away saying, I'm never going to be back in the classroom.
famous last words, right? But Dia, I'll tell you, and I mean this with all my heart. I love these students in a way that I don't think I've ever loved a group of people. And would you know that every student I've ever taught, 100% of the students I've ever taught have my personal cell phone number, and they still call. I still communicate with students that have been graduated for a few years. And so, whatever they think they get out of my lectures, I'm getting way more out of it because I get to spend all my time with people who are dreamers, and the world is theirs for the taking, and and I get to be a part of that, and it's one of the most beautiful, wonderful experiences of my adult life, and I'm so glad that God's given me this opportunity. And I love where I teach. I love the students. I love the administration. It's just very, very fortunate. I pinch myself sometimes. Is this real? But
Because you
that, to answer your
belong
question,
there.
the longest way possible, that's my answer.
You belong there. And what is the
Yeah.
subject you teach, or subjects? I don't know. What classes do you teach?
Yeah, so I teach theology. We have a both an associate's and a bachelor's program in theology, and so there are a variety of theology classes that they take over the course of their time at Elam Bible College, and I teach many of those upper level theology classes.
Mhm.
Occasionally, they'll ask me to teach history of Christianity, which is really my first love. It was the first master's degree that I got, and I just started teaching New Testament Greek. So theology and New Testament Greek, and when I beg hard enough, they let me teach history of Christianity.
Yeah, well, it's Greek to me. I
Yeah,
took Greek enough to I know the alphabet,
right,
and I can pick out a few words. But in
right.
I majored in uh, Christian ed, and we had to take a language, so I chose
Yeah,
Greek. But that
yeah,
was a while ago, and I haven't seen myself using it very often, except for Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. You can look up.
yeah. Thank God for Strong.
Yeah, that helps. Well, another accomplishment I would put there is actually publishing your book about George Washington. And let's talk about that a little bit. What inspired you to write this book? How long did it take you? And why should we read it? What are we going to get out of it? I think I know the answers
Yeah.
to.
So the simple answer is I love history, all kinds of history, and George Washington is my favorite founding father for a lot of reasons. And really, it was just a matter of prayer. I felt like I had something to say. And I spend all of my time when I'm teaching from a a Protestant evangelical Christian perspective about the Bible and things like that. But I wanted to write a book that appealed beyond just Christians and talk about George Washington and talk about his virtue. And George Washington's virtue, his moral compass, his ethical foundation flowed from his Christian faith. He was not a deist. He was a dedicated Christian. And just I'll tell you briefly, this really famous picture that you see of George Washington kneeling in the snow next to his horse, that really happened. Someone walked up on him, kneeling in the snow next to his horse, praying out loud, and they wrote in their diary about it. And so I wanted to write a story about George Washington and his virtues and identify several of his virtues, including how he dealt with failure and what can that teach us Americans who are so fractured and have almost no sense of moral compass. And so finding Washington, how do we find Washington in our current generation? And that's really why I wrote the book.
Well, and how long did it take you?
It took about 6 or 8 months to write it. I took my time with it, and it's not a very long book. It's actually almost too short. You know how that goes for a published book.
Right, right.
But I think I maybe was at 35,000 words or something like that. A really short book, and took about six
More
or eight
likely
months.
to be read, though. It's more likely
Like,
that people will read it if it's shorter.
yeah, there a lot of people that read it in a day. They sat down and read it in a day. Like, if you commit to it and you're on vacation or something. And so, I've got more books in me that will probably be longer, but that's really the motivation behind it. I love this place we live. This country has been a blessing to the world. I still think that we can be. We need a revival. We need people to turn back to Jesus. We need a revival. We need churches to be revived. And so it was tough for me a little bit to kind of stray from this biblical evangelical message and talk about George Washington and try to get people to think about it. And it wasn't my idea. It came through prayer, and the book was fairly well received. And I think I did okay. I learned a lot. The next book will be different, right? But yeah, it was a great experience, and I wouldn't
And
change anything.
writing is rewriting. Writing is rewriting because
Yeah.
you get it out and then you have to tweak it and
Right, that's right. Yeah, you have to have tough skin. You have to let other people write it and tell you what's not good and like, hey, you've told this story twice, that sort of thing. And you just have
it
to have
was a
thick
really good
skin.
one.
Yeah,
Um, right. And you know what you're thinking. And when somebody else reads it, they're gonna wait, what? There's something missing. but you don't see it missing because you know what it's about. And
Right.
you have to have a concept editor and a line editor, someone that will go by and go through and put a comma and change a word. You change your tenses here. It's a I don't think people realize what all is involved. But I think
No,
everybody has a book in them of some kind.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. My wife wrote a kid's book a few years ago. She owns her own pediatric practice, and to kind of go along with that practice, she wrote a children's book. And I don't know that she'd ever really considered writing a book, but just one day thought, I'm going to write a kid's book, and she wrote one. And so I'm with you. I think most people have a book in them. It's just not everyone takes that step to do it. And now with self-publishing, it's literally anyone can write a book.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. Each person, and I know you agree with this, we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which he prepared beforehand. Each one of them
Beforehand.
is uniquely made with our own story that nobody else has.
Right.
And other people can learn from it, other people can
Right.
grow from it. It's worth our sharing. What will the next book be about?
So it'll probably be an academic book. I want to write an ecclesiology book, a book on the church um, for for academia. But I've got to write this dissertation first. I got to get it. I got to get that out of the way first. But I think the next book I write, I would like to write an ecclesiology book about how to think about the church. And so that's on the shelf. But the next historical book that I write, I want to write a book on the women who made America. I want to write about the women that we don't hear about, you know, Abigail Adams or just any number of women who embraced faith that helped um, that helped to make America who it is. So there's a couple of books in there. I just will see if I live long enough to get them out.
Oh, you will, because it's part of your work and it's already been prepared for you and you can't be gone until your work is finished.
Here you go.
So the longer you put off getting your book written, does that mean you live longer? No,
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of when you said that. Like, I'm going to live forever because the way I procrastinate, I'll live to be 200 years old.
before you get that book written. Okay, so what makes you feel like you belong is my second question I ask all my guests.
Yeah, Dia, it's my faith. It's the the fellowship with the Spirit that God allows me to have through His grace and His mercies that are new every morning, and this family of believers that I get to be with, and I talk about it all the time. But these college students at Elam Bible College that I get to spend time with, and the president of the college who I know who he is and he knows who I am. I work for him, but he and I are becoming friends and seeing that relationship blossom. And it's it's all about this life that God has given me and the people around me that really give me a sense of belonging. My family, the way that I belong in my family is all rooted in what Jesus has done for my wife and I, and how God is the tie that binds our marriage together, and the work that I do. And so the sense of belonging that I have is really tied to the fact that Jesus did for me what I could not do for myself, and not just salvation, but these people in my life that not only bring joy to my life now, but I'll be with these people forever. And so really that's the simple answer, Dia, that it's my relationship with Jesus that grants me this sense of belonging, that leaves me with a fulfillment that most people don't have, and I didn't have until Jesus reached down and saved me.
Richard, I think as hard as it was for you before in your BC days, before Jesus, before Christ, BC, um, you can appreciate what you have now so much more because you know what it's like not to have it.
Yeah. No, yeah, I don't, I say this a lot. If I were to wake up in the morning and had gone back in time and I was a 14-year-old boy, knowing everything that I know, with all the knowledge that I have now, I would let everything unfold exactly like it unfolded if it meant that I got to be adopted into God's family and receive a call to ministry and meet my wife. Like it was worth it all. All the bad stuff, all the nights where you don't know if your mom's going to live or die, and you're trying to you're trying to find a way to process this horrible environment as a a 9, 10, 11 year old, and as a boy
Did you have
thinking that you have to
siblings?
be a man in these situations. I wouldn't trade any of it.
Did you have siblings?
I have a sister. She passed away last year, but yeah, I had a sister that was 3 years older than me, and she was right there in the thick of it as well. Really had it worse than me because she was the older sibling. She knew more, right? She understood
Right,
more.
right. Wow. All right. We're at the third question. And your favorite quote is surprise, surprise from George Washington. It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favor. Now, you can't tell me George Washington wasn't a Christian when you read that quote.
That's right. And Dia, that's the reason it's one of my favorite quotes is because number one, George Washington said it. Number two, he is without question the most essential founding father. We would not have a republic were it not for him. And I'm not going to go into all that, but literally, we wouldn't have. The Constitutional Convention was his idea. And so we wouldn't even have a republic were it not for him. And he appealed to God, obviously using, Enlightenment language that we're not that familiar with, but that quote sums up the George Washington that I've come to know through objective research. I
Okay,
look, yeah, go
question.
ahead.
He's kneeling by his horse praying. How old is he?
He's in his 40s.
Okay,
Yeah.
because that people accomplished so much more before they got older. Like,
Yeah. Well, you had less to distract you. We love John Wesley, and I've taught about John Wesley for decades now. But one of the things about John Wesley that I love so much is that John Wesley would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I always admired that. I'm like, wow, he gets up so early to read the Bible. But then you find out that because there's nothing to do, he goes to bed at 6:30 at night, right? It doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal. But
right.
yeah, certainly you become a man a lot sooner, and you struck it on your own a lot sooner. You had a lot more responsibility a lot sooner. And so, yeah, men and women did more sooner, but they didn't live as long, but they did more sooner
But they got more done in the time that they were alive. John
for sure.
Calvin wrote the Institutes when he was in his 20s, I think.
That's right. That when he's 21. That's right. His first edition. And although he edited the Institutes a couple of times, it's substantively it did not change.
He
Yeah.
edited it 5 times and wrote it in Greek or something. I mean, I was hearing a podcast about it. So, talk more about this quote from George Washington, besides the fact that, hello, nobody can say he's not a Christian, although people do.
Yeah, well, it speaks to the ethos of who we were supposed to be as a nation. He's not our founding father because that's his nickname. He's our founding father because of who he was and what he did. Obviously, his role in the Revolutionary War, his role beyond that at the Constitutional Convention, the president of that convention, and then becoming the first president, and then after 2 terms, laying down power that surprised everyone in a world where it was all kings and queens that had power forever. And so all of that, Dia, all of that was based on his faith. And it was, George Washington wasn't the only person that felt that way. There were some deists, right? There were some people that weren't as serious about their faith, but the men who gathered together to write our Constitution, to write the Bill of Rights, that wrote the Declaration of Independence, that put together the Constitutional Convention that created the Republic from the Confederacy, because we were a confederacy before, and it was all founded in a Christian ethic and the Christian faith. People don't know this, but the first Congress printed a Bible. It was the the congressional edition of the King James Bible. And so that quote really embodies this this ethos of the founding fathers against a revisionist history that they were all just a bunch of deists that didn't really take their faith seriously. That's why that quote is so important to me.
Absolutely. I mean, how can people say we're not founded as a Christian nation? I mean, I guess people can say whatever they want to say,
Yeah, it's
but
just a revisionist history. That's all it is. It's people that are offended by it and want us to be something differently than we've always been, and that's really what it boils down to.
right. Well, this has been very enlightening and inspiring, and we could talk on and on and on. But before we close, do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Yeah, I do, and I appreciate the time. So look, in my role with Elam Bible College, the president of our college, Dr. Fred Antonelli, he has tasked me with a singular role. And at Elam Bible College, those of us that are in leadership don't want your students and your kids to go to a state-sponsored school. When you look at polling data from recently from the last couple of years, over 60% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, reject when it comes to colleges, they reject men and women's spaces, they reject DEI, they reject race-based policies. A full third of American students, 18-year-olds, a full third of 18-year-olds in the last 2 years have rejected colleges because of liberal ideology. So what, and before President Trump said that men couldn't go in women's spaces, the NCAA, all the schools affiliated with the NCAA, 95% of those schools had policies that promoted transgenderism. And so even though that's been relaxed under President Trump, another president could simply just undo that, right? And so what we see this dichotomy that exists between what Christian schools can offer versus state schools. When you send your kids to a Christian school, Christian schools have a higher graduation rate. Christian schools have 82% of all students who go to a Christian college or university report a very positive impact on their sense of meaning and belonging. I brought that quote
Yeah.
for you, versus 66% in just a state-sponsored school. The college loan default rate is lower with students that went to a Christian college, and the job placement rate is higher. 98% of all graduates from a Christian college are are either working within 6 months of that degree or in graduate school within 6 months of that degree versus almost about 80%. It's about 78% of students that go to a state school. All that's great. All that's wonderful. But here's our pitch for Elam Bible College. All of your listeners, I just want you to reach out to me at Richard Rains at elam.edu, or just go to Elam, E-L-I-M, elam.edu, and check out the school. What we want is we want you to trust us with your students. And I want students to trust us, because what's going to happen is when you come to Elam, we are committed to your spiritual development and your discipleship. You're going to take classes with me, and we are going to push you to do hard things. We're going to push your kids and grandkids that come to Elam to do really hard things, to think about hard things, to think about spiritual things that they're going to get challenged with when they leave Elam Bible College. And
Mhm.
so what we don't want is we don't want you sending your kids to a state school anymore. Full stop. Right? And if you don't want to send your kids to Elam Bible College, still reach out to me, because we all hang out together. All of us people that went to Christian schools, and the president of our school knows all these other presidents. We'll find the right spot for you. Now look, we're going to try to get you to Elam first, but if not, we'll find a place for you to go. But I'll give you one example of one of the things that we've decided to do at Elam that no other school's doing. Most schools have chosen to either be a liberal arts institution or a technical college. But what we've decided to do is find a way, how can we embrace the new economy, and how can we embrace the real discipleship of as many young people as possible who may or may not want to go to a traditional four-year college. For instance, we have certificate programs. We have a construction trade certificate program at a four-year college. You don't find that many at many four-year colleges, but you can come to Elam. You can spend a year with us learning the Bible and learning theology and learning business classes and learning OSHA regulations. And we guarantee you a 6-month internship, a paid $22 an hour paid internship in the construction industry to get you started in your construction journey, and just little things like that. And so what we want is we want for students and their parents, before they start applying to all these state schools where we know what they're going to get. They're going to get political leftist indoctrination. That is not a political statement, Dia. That's not me, if I'm a Republican, saying something about these schools. These schools are more interested in turning your student into a leftist ideologue than they are about teaching your student to think through issues and have conversations. And they're certainly not interested in the spiritual well-being of your student. But if you'll trust
They're
us with
not
your student,
interested in getting their students to think about
that's right.
anything.
That's right.
Think. They just
I tell
want
my
them to
students all the time, Dia. I tell them, so obviously, in the upper level theology classes, you have to write a paper, right? And I don't have to agree with your conclusions in your research paper for me to give you a good grade on the paper, as long as it was written well and has good sources, right? Because I'm not
if
going
you
to
can
tell you
argue your
what to think,
point.
right?
Mm-hmm.
My job is to teach you how to think critically. My job is to make sure that when you look at an issue, that you consider all the various elements of that issue, and that you make informed decisions. That's my job, and it's my job to guide you spiritually and let the Spirit do the rest. Right? That's my job. My job is to ask you to do hard things. My job is to ask you to say, tell me why what James says about justification is not that much different than what Paul said, even though they read differently. That's hard. That's really hard to do. But you do that, and you learn the value of God's word, and that God's word is special in terms of ancient literature. All of that to say that if there's one thing that people could take from this podcast, just one thing, when it comes to belonging, and that's what you're doing, you're trying to teach people about belonging, right? And hear stories of belonging. What we want for your student, and if you're a high school student listening to this, what we want for you is we want you to be a part of something that's bigger than you. We want you to be a part of something that means more than just where can I go to work after 4 years. What we want you to do is we want you to become a part of a family that we've created. The Elam Bible College is 101 years old, not going anywhere, right? The worst thing about Elam is the snow in the winter, because it's in New York, near Rochester, New York. So we have students from everywhere that love it. It's a family, and it is a place where you can come belong, and it's a place where you can come and be discipled and be prepared, not just for your vocation and not just academically, but prepared spiritually. When you go to Elam, we ask that you not ask, we require that you're on campus 1 week before classes start every semester, because every semester starts with a full week of prayer. We have prayer week for 1 week before the semester starts. And if you're an on-campus student, then you have to come in. Obviously, we have a very robust distance education program as well. But we want parents and grandparents and students to stop funding these godless institutions and send your kids to a Christian school. Visit elam.edu and let us see if we can be the right place for your student.
I love it. Wow. So, well, we could just keep talking, but no time. We're out of time. So, to our amazing guest, Richard, thank you. And to our listeners, belongers, stay connected, stay true to yourself, and always remember, you belong. This is Dia Irby with Here Where You Belong podcast, signing off. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in to Hear Where You Belong. We hope today's episode has inspired you to embrace the beauty of belonging in your own life. Remember, no matter where you are or where you're headed, you have a place where you truly belong. Join us again next time for more insightful conversations and heartwarming stories. Until then, stay connected, stay true to yourself, and always remember that you belong.